What's going on, guys? Welcome back. It's that time of year again. We're at the end of 2024, and I'm here to do a bunch of lists and rankings. The first of which is my top 5 musical scores of the year. This is a tradition I started 2 years ago, roughly, and I haven't dropped it yet. However, this was a particularly difficult year when it came to isolating 5 great musical scores, not because of the quantity of them, but due to how scarce they've been this year. Up until recently, I had trouble coming up with 5. I thought I might have to limit it to 3 this year, but thankfully, a couple gems came along in the last month or so. So, I even have a few honorable mentions, which is what we're going to start with. And my first honorable mention is the score for The Wild Robot, a film that I just finally got around to watching last weekend, which you would know if you had seen my most recent video. And I think this film had a really solid score. Now, it wasn't exceptional in my opinion, hence why it isn't in the top 5, but it complemented the film very well. Chris Bowers is an artist that I was largely unfamiliar with before this film, but he's certainly making a name for himself. The track I Could Use a Boost made for one of the most emotionally powerful scenes I've seen in animation all year. Moving on to my second and final honorable mention, I have the score for Wicked. I was shocked when the credits for this film came up, and I realized that John Powell was responsible for the score. Yes, the same John Powell who composed the music for the Bourne trilogy, How to Train Your Dragon, and Solo: A Star Wars Story. I don't think I've heard a memorable score from him since Solo, but it's about time he had another win under his belt, and he did a damn good job here. I love the way he incorporated the melodies of the various songs composed by Stephen Schwartz as recurring leitmotifs to remind us of certain musical ideas established throughout the story. And getting into my list, at number 5, we have the score for The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. Now, this film just came out last week, but the score was released a week earlier than that, so I've had a few weeks to think on it, and I've determined that it most definitely deserves to be in my top 5. I've seen some people saying the only memorable parts of this soundtrack are when it reuses the themes composed by Howard Shore, but frankly, I think that's being quite uncharitable to Stephen Gallagher's work here. Of course, there is a certain novelty to hearing these classic leitmotifs from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings films again, like the themes for Gondor, Rohan, The One Ring, and even Nature's Reclamation at a specific point towards the end, which I won't spoil for those of you who have yet to see the film. But even beyond that, I think Gallagher did a great job of blending Shore's musical stylings with his own vision of this world. Hera's theme is quickly becoming one of my new favorites from Middle-earth, and pieces like The Rider or Hama's song make for wonderful new additions to the plethora of existing Middle-earth and credit songs. And at number 4, I have the score for Inside Out 2. Now, this score is special for a few reasons. One, it's the first Pixar score to have been composed entirely by a woman, and number 2, it's Andrea Datzman's first time being credited as sole composer, despite having worked with Michael Giacchino on countless scores of his over the years for films like the Star Trek reboot, Spider-Man Homecoming, Rogue One, and several others that you've probably heard of. And she did a fantastic job building off of what Giacchino did in the first Inside Out, with his classic main theme being given reprises at a few key emotional moments. But she also brought a new, fresh energy to this film, with her use of electric guitar during Riley's hockey sequences, or chaotic violin strings to represent anxiety. A genius choice, if you ask me. I'm overjoyed that this film's score has made it onto a shortlist for the Oscars next year. We'll have to wait and see if it actually gets nominated. If not, then I'll have officially lost faith in the Academy's ability to effectively assess music, especially in animation after they snubbed Across the Spider-Verse's score last year. By the way, there's a musicology joke in this movie. I can't be 100% certain that that was Datzman's idea, but if so, thank you for convincing the writers to include that, because as someone taking a music major,
I understood that reference.
coming in at number 3, I have the score for Dune Part 2. I mean, what did you guys expect? This score is iconic at this point, and I was beyond pissed when they almost excluded Hans Zimmer from Oscar consideration because this score didn't have enough original music in it, despite them continuing to nominate John Williams for his scores for films like Rise of Skywalker and Dial of Destiny, both of which are films with 1% original music in their soundtracks. But I'm glad they amended their mistake and have decided that Zimmer is eligible for an Oscar. With that little tangent out of the way, what more needs to be said about this score? In the behind the scenes for Dune Part 2, Zimmer says that both he and Denis Villeneuve agreed that his love theme for Paul and Chani is one of his most beautiful compositions ever. I'm not sure I'd go that far myself, but there's no denying how well his score complements this film. His music has become permanently ingrained into the DNA of these films to a point where they would not work without it. With that said, similar to Ludwig Göransson's score for Oppenheimer last year, it isn't one that I've revisited as much as the two above it on this list. It's not something that I go out of my way to listen to for fun. However, due to its cultural impact and how well it services the story, it needed to be included on this list. Now, my top 2 are basically on the same level. It was incredibly difficult for me to decide which one fell where. They are both my most listened to soundtracks of the entire year. Unfortunately, this is a list, so one has to be number 2 and one has to be number 1. So, based on how I'm feeling today, my second favorite musical score of 2024 was for Star Wars The Bad Batch Season 3. I know this isn't that surprising coming from the guy who has 3 videos analyzing the music from this show. In fact, I've already said most of what I wanted to say here in my Crosshair and Dr. Hemlock musical analyses. But what the Kiners have been able to do with this show is something truly special. Their music always retains the spirit of John Williams, while giving this show its own unique identity. They've kept their track record with basically every Star Wars project they've been involved in, and this is some of the best work they've ever done. Don't get me wrong, their score for Season 2 was absolutely fantastic. I actually feel kind of bad for only putting it at number 4 on my list last year. In retrospect, I might actually bump it up to number 2 from last year. There's just so much variety in this soundtrack. Of course, we've got the classic action-y Bad Batch theme, but we also have some legitimately menacing and unsettling music for our antagonists, Dr. Hemlock, the operatives, and his forces inside Mount Tantus, or even the eerie yet strangely bittersweet themes for Crosshair and Mayday as he laments his past failures. Done wrong, this score could be tonally incoherent and generally messy, yet somehow it's cohesive. It all comes together to form this beautiful story told through music. Those of you who came to my channel from my Bad Batch music analysis videos have heard me gush enough about this score, and you most certainly know how much I love this show. But it can't be understated that the Kiners and their music have elevated this series to being some of my favorite Star Wars storytelling ever. And without further ado, my number one favorite musical score of 2024 was The Rings of Power Season 2. Now, say what you will about this show. I've certainly said my fair share about it in my 23-minute video tearing it apart. But Bear McCreary's music is the best thing about it. I already loved his music for Season 1. It landed at number 2 on my list in 2022. The only reason it wasn't number 1 is because it had to contend with Lorne Balfe's masterpiece of a soundtrack for his Dark Materials, Season 3. So McCreary decided to take one look at his score for Season 1 and blew it out of the water with Season 2. If you ask me, this season proved that McCreary's score is worthy enough to be compared to what Howard Shore did with his 6 Middle-earth films. Every character and culture in this show, by extension, are represented and defined by their music and the different ways that McCreary twists it throughout the story. Let's take the Numenor theme, for example. What initially started out as an epic, triumphant theme for this regal, ancient civilization is completely transformed simply by changing the starting interval of the theme from a minor third to a major third descending, creating a far more sinister sound that perfectly embodies Farazan's corrupt rule of the kingdom as the season progresses. There are many more examples of this throughout the soundtrack, and of McCreary's ability to seamlessly weave together these countless leitmotifs. For evidence of this, look no further than some of my favorite tracks from this season: The Great Eagle, The Secret Fire, Sauron's Illusion, No Passage for Low Men, and, of course, The Sun Yet Shines. But of course, the real kicker, what pushed this score over the edge into my number 1 spot, is the song Old Tom Bombadil. And not only the Rufus Wainwright version, which I'm pretty good at singing at this point, but also the several reprises of it throughout the soundtrack, namely The River Daughters, sung by McCreary's wife, Raya Yarborough, and the version that both Gandalf and Tom Bombadil sing in one of the final scenes of the show, which has become my number 1 most listened to song on Spotify this year, which is quite interesting. There's something about that rendition that always brings me this feeling of home and peace, no matter where I am or how I'm feeling. Regardless of the many flaws that Rings of Power may have, I'm glad it exists, if only for the reason that I get to listen to this gorgeous music. And I'm happy that projects like War of the Rohirrim and even Rings of Power Season 2 have remembered the musical aspect of Middle-earth. That's something I was worried they'd forgotten about since the dwarves sat down and sang the Misty Mountain song at the beginning of The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. So I'm overjoyed that this show and the new film have revitalized that musical component of Tolkien's work. But that's pretty much it for my top 5 favorite musical scores of 2024. As I said at the beginning of the video, there weren't as many killer soundtracks this year when compared to 2023. I actually struggled to find 5 that I truly loved, but there were some diamonds in the rough. And the scores that we got for projects like The Bad Batch and Rings of Power remind me why I love music. I'm proud to be a film music nerd. But you guys let me know. What are your thoughts on this list? Do you agree with my placements? Do you disagree with some of them? Were there any fantastic scores this year that I neglected to mention? Just whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.